I wouldn't have said so, no. Not really. But no, I don't get the feeling that she's wildly optimistic about life. A pragmatist, I think.
The sealed letter had remained untouched since Queen Elizabeth's death, protected by instructions so strict that even senior courtiers had been denied access. But when Princess Anne finally broke the royal seal inside Windsor Castle, the words waiting beneath it did more than expose a private judgment. They named Anne as the Queen's true royal heir, and placed Camilla at the center of a reckoning no one inside the palace could stop. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne held the envelope steady as King Charles, Prince William, Camilla, and 2 trusted advisors waited inside the oak room. No one moved. The royal seal, a mark confirming the document carried the late monarch's authority, had survived every attempt to open it early. Elizabeth had ordered that it remain closed until a constitutional milestone, and each person named within it had to be present. That mattered because the letter was not comfort. It was a command meant to test the family after her death. Anne began reading. Her mother named her the true royal heir in duty, discipline, and guardianship of the crown, giving her authority to defend the monarchy whenever ambition threatened its stability. Charles lowered his eyes. He had inherited sovereign power, yet his hand tightened around the chair as his mother's judgment cut through his reign. William watched him, then turned toward Camilla. Camilla did not hide her disbelief. The letter warned that a consort's household must never influence succession, patronage, ceremonial rank, or royal property. A consort was the spouse of a reigning sovereign, not an independent ruler, and Elizabeth's wording drew that boundary clearly. She asked whether the warning was aimed at her. Anne did not answer. A second folded page slipped from the envelope. A second. Anne removed her glasses and placed it flat on the table. Her voice hardened as she asked Camilla whether she had known the warning existed. The queen consort denied it, but William saw her expression change when the princess mentioned a missing red dispatch box from Elizabeth's private apartments. Such boxes carried confidential royal papers, and this one had disappeared after the queen's death. Silence took control. Anne turned toward Camilla and declared that the letter was no longer a message from the past. It was an instruction requiring action. Before the day ended, she would confront her privately about the decision that had driven Elizabeth to write it. But before Anne could demand the truth, the room had to confront the painful history connecting a dutiful daughter, a conflicted king, and the woman now seated beside the throne. To the public, the confrontation appeared to be about a letter. Inside the royal family, it was about something far more personal. Anne had spent her life defending a crown she would never inherit. Camilla had spent decades fighting for acceptance beside the man who did, and behind them both stood the memory of Elizabeth, a mother, sovereign, and silent judge whose final words had now reopened every wound they believed duty had buried. Princess Anne had never needed applause to understand her place. She had accepted difficult tours, endless duties, and private family burdens because service mattered more to her than attention. The crown, the monarchy as an enduring institution rather than a single person, had always come before comfort, even when that loyalty placed her against Charles. Camilla had followed a very different path. She had survived years of rejection before becoming queen consort, the wife of a reigning king. Yet the title could not erase every doubt within the family. Acceptance before the public had never guaranteed trust behind closed doors. Anne remembered one private conversation with Queen Elizabeth after a bitter household dispute. Her mother had taken her aside with no advisors present and said that popularity disappears, but discipline decides whether the monarchy survives. The daughter had carried those words ever since. Camilla now sat alone after the Windsor gathering, staring at an untouched tray of tea. Humiliation pressed harder than anger, because the sealed letter questioned more than her judgment. It challenged the place she had spent decades struggling to secure. King Charles entered quietly and found her still standing beside the table. She asked whether his mother had trusted Anne more than she trusted him. He opened his mouth, But no answer came. The silence wounded her more deeply than any accusation. Prince William later met Anne privately and described several recent household decisions, documented in internal briefing papers. Each carried Camilla's approval, yet none had reached the full royal council, the senior group responsible for reviewing major royal decisions. That meant Elizabeth's warning was not trapped in the past. It had touched something still unfolding. William then revealed through those same records that the Queen Consort had attempted to place a trusted household ally in control of the royal archives, the protected collection holding generations of private royal documents. The appointment would have granted access to correspondence belonging to Elizabeth and Prince Philip. Anne felt her suspicion harden into resolve. She reached into her handbag and removed a small handwritten card her mother had once given her. The message was brief. When affection clouds judgment, duty must speak plainly. She read it twice, closed her fist around it, and remembered a forgotten ceremony at Balmoral when everything had changed. And buried inside that Balmoral memory was the single decision that turned Elizabeth's private concern into a sealed command. The warning in Elizabeth's letter had not grown from jealousy, rumor, or ancient rivalry. It began during one private ceremony at Balmoral, when a decision was made without the Queen's consent and presented to her as though resistance were no longer possible. Anne witnessed the moment. Camilla defended it. Charles remained silent. And before that night ended, Elizabeth had reached the conclusion that would one day shake the monarchy from beyond the grave. The gathering had taken place during the final phase of her reign, when age had slowed the monarch but had not weakened her judgment. She had called Charles, Anne, Camilla, and several senior advisors together to discuss royal patronages and ceremonial privileges after the accession. Patronages were formal links between royals and charities, while ceremonial privileges determined who represented the crown during important national occasions. The meeting was supposed to be consultative. Everyone could advise, but nothing could become final without Elizabeth's signature. Camilla changed that balance when she placed a completed reassignment order before the Queen. The document transferred several charities and ceremonial appointments, traditionally controlled by the sovereign, into the future consort's household. A consort's household was the staff and office supporting the monarch's spouse, not a separate center of royal authority. Charles had already approved the order. Elizabeth stared at his signature, then asked why a recommendation had been turned into a decision before she had spoken. He avoided his mother's gaze. Camilla defended the restructuring, insisting it would modernize the monarchy and prevent confusion after the succession. Anne pushed her chair back. She warned that service could not be divided like private property, especially when the charities involved had answered directly to the sovereign for generations. Camilla struck back, accusing her of resentment because she would never stand at the future center of power. The words landed hard. Charles said nothing, and that silence wounded Elizabeth more than the argument itself. The Queen left the room, with the unsigned order still in her hand. Charles followed her into the adjoining library, and found her beside Prince Philip's empty chair, struggling to contain her disappointment. She asked him whether loyalty to the woman he loved had become stronger than loyalty to the crown he would inherit. Again, he could not answer. Elizabeth refused to sign the order, but she did not destroy it. She called Anne forward and asked her to witness as the paper was placed inside a red dispatch box, a secure case used for confidential royal documents, together with a handwritten account of the meeting. Later that night, the monarch summoned her private secretary and dictated the sealed letter. She declared that her daughter possessed the clearest understanding of royal guardianship and must be empowered to intervene if such pressure returned. Before Anne left Balmoral, Elizabeth gripped her wrist and said, "You may one day have to stand against someone Charles loves." Anne finally understood whom her mother feared. Years later, with Elizabeth gone and the sealed command exposed, Anne walked toward Camilla's private room, carrying the truth neither woman could avoid. There were no secretaries in the room, no advisors, no king to soften the words or redirect the anger. Anne entered carrying Elizabeth's letter, closed the door behind her, and placed the document between herself and Camilla. For several seconds, neither woman spoke. Then Anne asked a question that stripped away titles, ceremony, and decades of uneasy peace. How much power were you prepared to take before someone finally told you to stop? Camilla's private sitting room at Clarence House had been chosen deliberately. Clarence House was the royal residence where she and Charles maintained their personal household, away from the formal machinery of Buckingham Palace. Anne wanted no hearing, no audience, and no public humiliation. This was a reckoning between two women who understood exactly what the letter could destroy. She made one point clear immediately. She was not challenging Charles's lawful succession, nor was she claiming the throne. The words, true royal heir, described Elizabeth's trust in her as guardian of duty and institutional integrity, not a new place in the legal line of succession. Camilla leaned forward and accused her of turning a dead mother's memory into a weapon. She insisted Elizabeth had accepted her marriage, recognized her public role, and understood how essential she had become to Charles. Then she struck deeper, claiming Anne had never forgiven her for becoming the person he trusted most. Anne did not flinch. Acceptance, she answered, was not surrender. The late queen had welcomed Camilla into the family, but she had never granted her ownership over royal history, appointments, or the monarchy's future direction. The queen consort rose so sharply that the leg of her chair struck the floor. She declared that she had earned her place beside the king through years of contempt, sacrifice, and public judgment. Anne remained seated and replied, beside him, not above the crown. The words ended every pretense of politeness. She opened her folder and produced a copy of the Balmoral reassignment order, followed by a second proposal, quietly revived after the accession. This new plan reached further, placing archives, patronages, and ceremonial precedence under greater control of the consort's household. Ceremonial precedence meant the formal order, deciding where royals stood, sat, and appeared during official events, making it a powerful public measure of rank. Camilla admitted supporting the proposal, but denied hiding it. Through that private conversation, she revealed that Charles had encouraged her to strengthen her office because he feared rival family centers would fracture the monarchy. Anne's anger changed. Pain replaced it, as she realized her brother may have repeated the same mistake that had wounded Elizabeth. She placed her pen down and asked whether he understood what the sealed letter could expose. Camilla held her gaze and delivered the final blow. Charles knew far more than he admitted at Windsor, and for months he had kept a second document bearing his mother's signature. The confrontation had exposed Camilla's ambition, but the greater shock now rested with Charles and the document he had chosen not to reveal. Charles had inherited the throne, the palaces, and every burden attached to the crown. Yet hidden inside his private office was something no sovereign could command into silence. A second instruction, written by his mother. While Anne confronted Camilla, the king sat alone with that document before him, knowing its contents could protect his wife, strengthen his sister, or expose the fatal weakness Elizabeth had feared most, his inability to separate love from judgment. The legal order remained untouched. Charles was still sovereign. William remained next in the constitutional succession, the fixed legal path determining who inherits the throne, and Anne possessed no claim that could displace either man. Yet Elizabeth had given her daughter something almost as powerful inside the family: moral authority to challenge decisions that threatened the monarchy's integrity. Royal influence did not depend only on crowns or laws. It moved quietly through access, patronages, household appointments, protected archives, historic jewels, military positions, and ceremonial precedents. Control those areas, and a private household could reshape public power without changing a single constitutional rule. Charles opened his desk drawer and removed the hidden page. He read alone until he reached his mother's warning about the dangers of emotional dependence. His breathing slowed. He removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his eyes, feeling betrayed by Elizabeth's timing, while recognizing the truth inside her words. Camilla had carried him through years of judgment and public hostility. She had become his refuge, but gratitude had slowly weakened his ability to refuse her requests. and love had begun to influence decisions that should have belonged only to duty. Prince William entered after receiving a private summons, and found his father still holding the page. He chose his words carefully, asking whether protecting one person had become more important than protecting public trust in the monarchy. Charles reacted with sudden anger, accusing the future king of judging a marriage he had never understood. William did not retreat. He asked why the second instruction had been hidden. The king finally admitted that he had delayed revealing it because he feared what Anne would do with its authority. The document granted her power to review household decisions involving royal archives, historic jewels, military appointments, and charities, once protected directly by the sovereign. Worse for Charles, Elizabeth commanded him to support his sister publicly whenever she intervened, preventing him from quietly weakening her role to protect Camilla. He reached for his fountain pen and began drafting a statement rejecting Anne's authority. Then he stopped. The words looked less like leadership and more like fear. Charles tore the unsigned page in half, rang for his private secretary, and ordered the immediate suspension of every pending appointment linked to the consort's household. The decision was final, but when Camilla received the notice, restraint gave way to fury, and a private family wound spread through the palace. Charles had finally acted, but the sound of that decision reached Camilla as a declaration that everything she had built could now be taken away. The notice arrived without ceremony. 3 appointments frozen, 2 archive transfers cancelled, every future decision involving protected royal assets placed under Anne's review. Camilla read the page once, then again, as though the words might change. They did not. Charles had chosen to honor Elizabeth's instruction, and for the first time since becoming queen, Camilla discovered that proximity to the throne could not shield her from a judgment carrying the authority of the woman who came before her. The consequences spread quickly through the royal household. Her chosen archive director was withdrawn, planned patronage transfers were paused, and ceremonial changes awaiting approval were sent for independent review. An independent review meant that officials outside the consort's immediate staff would examine each decision before it could proceed. The delay mattered because patronages shaped public influence, while ceremonial rank determined who stood closest to the sovereign during major national events. Senior courtiers divided almost immediately. Some believed Anne's oversight protected the crown from private ambition. Others feared it made the king appear unable to control his own household. Camilla received the notice while preparing for an afternoon engagement. She removed one pearl earring, placed it on the dressing table, and told her aide to cancel the appearance. She could not face cameras and pretend that nothing had changed. Charles entered soon afterward, and she demanded to know whether he truly believed she had tried to seize power. He answered carefully. He did not believe she wanted the throne, but he believed personal loyalty had blurred institutional boundaries, the same weakness Elizabeth had identified in him. Camilla heard only abandonment. She reminded him that she had endured years of hatred to remain beside him, only to be judged by his family once her position finally felt secure. The king did not deny her suffering, but he refused to reverse the order. Then the crisis deepened. A palace audit, a formal examination of records and access, found that correspondence connected to the Balmoral incident had been temporarily removed from the archive catalogue. Months earlier, security logs showed authorization from a senior member of the Queen Consort's household. Camilla denied ordering the removal, yet in a documented private briefing she admitted asking an aide to discover whether Elizabeth had left personal comments about her future role. She had wanted reassurance. Instead, her search created the appearance of concealment. Anne studied the access record without satisfaction. Disappointment replaced victory. She told Prince William that Camilla's greatest mistake was not ambition, but allowing fear of rejection to become an excuse for crossing protected boundaries. William understood that punishment alone would harden every side. He arranged a private meeting between his father and aunt, with no aides, no spouses, and no palace officials present. With the household shaken and Camilla isolated, the monarchy's future came down to a brother and sister speaking without crowns, advisors, or excuses between them. Away from the palace offices, Anne and Charles met without advisors, red boxes, or prepared statements. For once, he was not the king, and she was not the princess royal. They were simply Elizabeth's children, carrying different pieces of the same inheritance. Charles feared losing the woman who had stood beside him. Anne feared losing the principles their mother had spent a lifetime defending. Only one of them could speak first, and Anne chose compassion. Prince William had arranged the meeting in a small private room at Windsor, the same place where his father and aunt had once waited as children during formal family occasions. That choice mattered, because neither could hide behind official power there. A red box was the secure case used to carry confidential royal papers, but none sat between them now. Anne told her brother she did not want to control him, humiliate Camilla, or create a competing court, a rival center of influence operating against the sovereign household. Her only aim was to restore the boundaries Elizabeth believed essential to the crown's survival. Charles listened before admitting, in that private conversation, why he had concealed the second instruction. He had feared his sister would use it immediately, and that his wife would see his obedience as betrayal. Anne answered softly, but without retreat. His silence had created the very betrayal he hoped to prevent. By protecting Camilla from discomfort, he allowed suspicion to grow around her, and forced their mother's warning to surface in the most damaging way possible. The king's resistance finally weakened. He confessed that after losing Elizabeth, he had clung more fiercely to those closest to him. Grief had made every disagreement feel like another threat of abandonment. Anne saw the pain beneath his defensiveness, and her anger softened. She understood that he had not acted from cruelty, but love distorted by fear. Then she disclosed what she had withheld. The second page contained one final handwritten line. "Guard your brother as firmly as you guard the crown, because he will sometimes confuse protection with love." Charles lowered his head. Their mother had judged him, but she had also asked Anne not to abandon him. That changed everything. He agreed to establish an independent Royal Stewardship Council, a small body designed to protect historic royal assets and review sensitive household decisions. Anne would serve as chair, while his constitutional authority remained intact, and Camilla's legitimate position as consort stayed secure. Charles reached across the table and placed Elizabeth's letter into his sister's hands. Anne returned it and said the instruction belonged to both of them now. He closed his fingers around the envelope and nodded. Yet their agreement could save the family only if Camilla accepted responsibility, and beyond Windsor's gates, the secret had already escaped. As Charles and Anne emerged with a path toward peace, the world beyond the palace was preparing its own judgment on the Queen's final intervention. By sunrise, the private words of Queen Elizabeth had escaped the palace walls. Broadcasters abandoned their schedules. Newspapers printed special editions. Crowds gathered beneath royal flags, carrying conflicting signs of loyalty, anger, and disbelief. Yet one image captured the entire crisis. Princess Anne leaving Windsor alone. Elizabeth's sealed envelope held against her coat, while the headline beneath her declared that the late Queen had chosen a guardian the monarchy could no longer ignore. Buckingham Palace moved quickly, releasing a carefully worded statement confirming that Anne had been designated guardian of royal stewardship. Royal stewardship meant the responsibility of protecting the monarchy's historic assets, traditions, and standards of service. The statement stressed that constitutional succession remained unchanged. Charles was still king, and William remained next in line. That distinction mattered because the words, "true royal heir," carried enormous emotional force, even though they did not give Anne a legal claim to the throne. Across the country, commentators began describing her as the heir to Elizabeth's values rather than the heir to her son's crown. The Crown Chronicle captured that feeling with a full-width photograph and one explosive headline, "The Queen's Final Choice, Duty Before Desire." Outside Buckingham Palace, people raised copies above their heads, while opposing voices argued beneath the gates. During a live national broadcast, veteran royal commentator Eleanor Grant delivered the sentence that defined the morning. Elizabeth did not rewrite the succession. She identified the person she trusted to stop the monarchy from losing itself. Grant's words spread across every network, turning a private family conflict into a national judgment. Outside Windsor Castle, an elderly woman placed flowers beside a photograph of the late monarch and told reporters that Anne had always represented service without vanity. Only yards away, supporters of Camilla called the letter cruel, insisting she was being condemned by a voice from the past without the chance to defend herself. Camilla watched the coverage alone. When the broadcast showed the flowers beneath Anne's image, she switched off the television and sat in silence. Resistance, she finally understood, would only make the crisis larger. Charles then issued a recorded palace statement announcing the Royal Stewardship Council, a new independent body created to review sensitive decisions involving royal history and property. Anne would serve as chair, with William named deputy. The king also confirmed an independent review of household appointments, while refusing to accuse his wife of deliberate misconduct. Camilla began writing her own response. She filled the first paragraph with anger, crossed it out, and set down the pen. Then she replaced it with one sentence, accepting that royal service required limits, even at the highest rank. The public had chosen Anne as the emotional victor, but her next act would decide whether that victory became revenge or repair. The final decision no longer concerned who had won the confrontation, but whether victory could be transformed into something strong enough to heal the crown. Anne could have used Elizabeth's letter to destroy Camilla's standing. She could have exposed every private mistake, claimed the moral victory, and allowed public anger to finish what the confrontation began. Instead, she chose the duty her mother had entrusted to her. The true royal heir was not the person destined to possess the throne. It was the person willing to protect it without exploiting its power. And Anne proved that. Guardianship could be stronger than ambition. The Royal Stewardship Council was formally established with narrow but meaningful authority over archives, historic property, legacy patronages, ceremonial appointments, and decisions carrying consequences beyond a single reign. The council was an independent royal body, created to review sensitive choices before private influence could reshape public duty. Charles remained sovereign. William remained the constitutional heir, meaning he still held the lawful position of next in line to the throne. Camilla remained queen. No title was rewritten, no succession overturned, and no legitimate position erased. The settlement restored boundaries where fear and loyalty had allowed them to blur. Anne returned to the same Clarence House room where the confrontation had begun. She placed the copy of the Balmoral Order before Camilla and said she had no intention of keeping it as a weapon. The queen consort answered through that private conversation with something she had resisted from the beginning: accountability. She admitted that her need to secure her place had become entangled with the authority of her household. Elizabeth's acceptance, she acknowledged, had never given her permission to reshape protected traditions without proper consent. Camilla extended her hand. Anne looked at it for a moment, then accepted it. The gesture held no easy warmth, but it carried something more durable: a truce built on clear limits rather than false affection. King Charles later thanked his sister, in a recorded palace address, for accepting a duty that brought scrutiny without glory. In private, he told her their mother had understood them both more clearly than either wished to admit. Anne then carried the original letter into the royal archives, the protected collection, preserving the monarchy's most important documents. Under joint sovereign protection, it could no longer be hidden, removed, or used by one household against another. Before the case closed, she touched Elizabeth's signature and promised that silence would never again be mistaken for loyalty. The phrase, "true royal heir," was finally understood. Charles had inherited the crown. William would inherit its future. Anne had inherited its conscience. Camilla's influence was restrained but not erased. The king's authority was strengthened through accountability, and his sister became the stabilizing force their mother intended. The confrontation ended without exile, revenge, or destruction. It ended with the monarchy remembering that service must always outrank personal desire. And so the sealed letter did not steal a crown, destroy a queen, or overturn a reign. It revealed that the monarchy's greatest inheritance was never power, but the courage to place duty above the people one loves. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.